Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. We are going to talk about mainly one subject today, and that subject is going to be drones, because I did a bit of an analysis on drones this morning. Go and check out my first news video, because I think there was some really interesting data that came out, and then bit of data analysis, and then my further analysis on top of that. The source data was Andrew Perpetua's, where he looks at an awful lot of drone footage, like an awful lot. And he then has been compiling these data sets of who is using what type of drone and what that drone is targeting. So in looking at an awful lot of Russian and Ukrainian footage of FPV drones in particular, so the analysis ended up being on FPV drones. So someone took all this FPV drone data, like the Russian and the Ukrainian data, and this was drones attacking infantry and drones attacking vehicles, and then did an analysis and see who is using drones more effectively or using more drones to attack based on the amount of footage that is available to see. There's a little bit of a push. Well, just very quickly, the broad conclusions were that Ukraine was having more success in targeting both infantry and mechanized equipment initially, and by initially I mean August. So the person who looked at the data started looking at the data in August and then finished in December. So August to December 2023. Infantry strikes, Ukrainians were using more FPV drones to hit infantry, and then eventually the Russians overtook the Ukrainians in December in that category. But not by a huge amount, but it was significant that the Russians kept increasing, and then took over. So the Russians were striking more Ukrainian infantry than Ukrainians were striking Russian infantry with FPV drones. But when it came to the mechanized equipment, the footage showed that the Ukrainians had a massive dominance in striking Russian equipment, and the Russians were unable to catch up in the same way they did with the infantry, to the point where it's sort of, I think it was a multiple of 4. The Ukrainians were destroying Russian, or hitting Russian equipment at least, more than the Russians were hitting Ukrainian equipment. Okay. So you could then draw lots of conclusions from that. The first conclusion is that the Ukrainians still do have a drone advantage over the Russians in terms of how much they are being used, which then leads one to believe that the Russians are lying when they're saying they're outproducing the Ukrainian drones by 6-1. So we heard that the Ukrainians had produced 50,000 drones in, I think it was December or maybe November, and the Russians were claiming they had produced 300,000. And I said at the time that I don't think that's true, because if they were producing 300,000 drones, you would see them on the front line being used. And you would see that translate into video footage, so drone footage. And you haven't seen that, and you haven't seen vast amounts of Ukrainian vehicles being destroyed at the same rate that you're seeing Russian vehicles being destroyed or damaged, and so on and so forth. So I think the conclusions from this analysis are that the Russians are lying about production, the Ukrainians are still using them more effectively, but there's an interesting switch in the use against infantry, where the Russians are using that slightly more, having slightly more success at the moment. And that could be because they are on the attack more, and in going on the attack, they're trying to take out Ukrainian infantry more as they move into those areas, or something like that. Whatever. Anyway, that was what I was discussing this morning. I thought it was really a good segment, not like good what I said, but like the subject matter, the source material was really interesting, I thought. Someone's push back a little bit here. Well, a couple of people have pushed back. This is a good faith pushback. This is a good question, good discussion here from TLM here. So just a concern about biases. Since Oryx, so Oryx with the open source data collection or aggregation of visually confirmed losses. Since Oris has dropped out of providing data, Andrew Perpetua is the Western source you are using a lot. And this is not a critique of Andrew Perpetua as a reliable source. The bias is inherent in the data sets that he has access to. The Ukrainians are effective at preventing damage taken by themselves from getting out into the information space. You say that AP compensates by making an extra effort to seek out Ukrainian losses in Russian sources. Do you see the problem here? The bulk of data is from Ukrainian sources and they are filtering out their damage. I mean, my first initial reaction before going to what Andrew Perpetua has told me, my first initial response is that's not a problem. The bulk of data is from Ukrainian sources. It's not. The bulk of data is from Russian sources. As I said, Andrew Perpetua had previously said he looks at 3 times more video footage from Russians than from the Ukrainians. And the data that he then says this is being destroyed, that's being destroyed, does not support that there's any kind of filtering out or that there is some kind of inherent bias. In fact, that's precisely what he's doing to try and mitigate that. And even if the Ukrainians are filtering out like unsuccessful ones or whatever, that's not the point. The point is how many vehicles have been destroyed. So it doesn't matter how unsuccessful they are. Like if the Ukrainians are filtering out more of their unsuccessful attempts, drone attempts, then that means they have even more drones. So say only 10% of them hit. Well, if 90% of them you aren't seeing footage of, then Ukraine's got even more drones. Now, the point is that the Ukrainians are showing more destruction to Russian equipment than the Russians are showing destruction to Ukrainian equipment. And unless the Russians are filtering out their successes, which of course they're not, then this shows that the Ukrainians are having more success than the Russians, especially when Andrew Perpetua is looking at 3 times more footage. So it's just, I don't think this pushback works here. So do you see the problem here? The bulk of the data is from the Ukrainian sources, incorrect, and they are filtering out their damage. The bulk is from the Russian sources. The Russians release relatively less FPV data, right? And this is what Andrew Perpetua is going to come on and speak about. He's not going to come on. He's just told me in a very kind of pithy manner that's not the case. There would need to be some weighting system to compensate for these discrepancies in the data sets. Look at it this way. There is a small pile and a big pile, and we are looking for gold in both. Looking harder in the smaller pile for gold doesn't change that it is a smaller pile. The piles don't matter. It's the amount of gold. Like, how much gold is found? Ukrainians are finding more gold than Russians. In terms of infantry, the Russians are finding more gold. I don't think we're really talking about successful versus unsuccessful strikes with FPV drones. I think they're all successful strikes is what we're talking about. These would need to be needs to be some weighting system. Looking harder in the smaller pile for gold doesn't change that it is a smaller pile. In addition, the big pile has had its gold stripped out before it's produced. Yes, there is attrition, but I'm not sure the data supports a narrative of Russia losing the attrition war. I would like it too, but I'm skeptical. It's too easy to be optimistic when the stakes are high. I think he's just, like, with all due respect, and thank you very much for this, it's nicely put. This is not an abrasive comment. This is like, okay, this is how I see it. I just think he's wrong. So there isn't... The Russians are being attrited at a greater rate, and that is being supported by the stats in terms of the general staff, just generally what the stats are claimed compared to, I know the Russians do claim some bonkers stuff, but generally from what we can see from our understanding the data that's out there, from what I see, from what the general staff claim, and then the defense of the general staff, which I try and set out in each of my videos, and then the outright lying of the Russian figures. Now, I think we can, before we even look at that data, I think we can be justified in thinking that the Russians are being attrited at a greater rate. And then when you look at the data, that also supports that. So Andrew said to me, I showed him this whole message. I said, mate, what do you think about this? And he said, why would he think Russia releases less FPV data? He said, they release dramatically more. And then in a separate line, he says, like capitals, way more. there is, in other words, there's an absolute ton of Russian drone footage that gets released, way more than Ukrainian footage. And sifting through that, you still get less destruction and damage to Ukrainian vehicles, and though not to infantry anymore, but to vehicles, than you do Ukrainian damage to Russian and destruction of Russian vehicles. So unfortunately, or not unfortunately, fortunately, actually, if you're pro-Ukrainian, this critical question doesn't hold up. But thank you very much for asking it, because then I can go back to Andrew and say, okay, let's clarify this, and it just we come to a greater understanding of what's going on. So thank you. Good faith discussion. Not so good faith discussion. So this is from Radhika Pereira, who is more and more like a Russian shill as the months go on. And I think that's probably initially where he came in at, really. Said a couple of things. Saying that Ukraine has better drone operators is almost similar to saying Ukraine has better drivers than Russians. I mean, they just don't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I'm going to deal with that. But my response to that is yes, it does. I've shared before reporting from drone operator training centers the fact that Ukraine has United 24 and a host of other entities providing and funding this training on a systematic basis goes against what you're saying. I know you're increasingly a shield for Russia, but try to ground some of your claims. And then here, again, you just explain why Russian drone usage is low compared to the Ukrainian army. Don't go back to the propaganda about drone numbers, because pretty much everyone agrees Ukraine has no comparative advantage when it comes to drones. This is just demonstrably false. No one agrees, and hardly anyone agrees with that unless they are the Russian propagandists. Like, have you seen what United 24 have done in terms of drone procurement? Have you seen what the Ukrainians themselves have done? They've absolutely ranked up. They've gone nuts. 50,000 drones a month is insanely good. They've had this advantage over much of the war. There are times where the Russians have advantages in certain areas, so they have used Lancets quite effectively. But again, that comes in spikes which I think reflects their production issues with them, and they're pretty expensive comparatively speaking. Ukrainians brought the first-person view drones to market, if you like, before the Russians, and the Russians had to play catch-up. And what they're doing now is playing catch-up. So the Ukrainians have had the comparative advantage throughout this war, generally speaking, when it comes to drones. I mean, I don't know that everyone agrees Ukraine has no comparative advantage is just demonstrably wrong. They are using them more because Russians are attacking everywhere. Once the Ukrainians decide to do their own attacks, you will see the Russian numbers go up. It's just not true. If you've got drones, you use them against the enemy. You're just going to do that, and the fact they're not using these drones suggests they don't have those drones. It seems ridiculous to see. They're waiting for the Ukrainians to attack. The Ukrainians have been using drones the whole time, whether on the attack or defense. They're using them on defense loads now, but my goodness, when the Ukrainians were on attack, they were using them too. I mean, the attrition rates for Russian equipment has gone up consistently since May, right? And they have been both on the attack and on the defense. So it just makes that argument doesn't work. So let's go and then look a little bit at some of those details. And we're going to pop into Ukraine, the latest, and this is going back to July last year. So going back to July last year, it's important to remember that since July, there has been 5 months. Okay, so since the research for this article, this was the end of July, but it is based on an article that was earlier in July, which would have been based on her doing research into that, and we'll pop into the article in a second. Even before that. So things have moved on from here, vastly so, given the amount of drones United 24 produced, the amount of ramping up of both the private and the public sector in Ukraine in terms of drone manufacture and procurement. So it's a whole different kettle of fish. Yet back here, what I'm doing is I'm going back to his claim that because I said, as a bit of a throwaway comment, that Ukrainian operators, there are more and better operators. When I say these throwaway comments, almost always my comments are based on justification. Like, I consume an absolute ton of data. I've listened to every single one of Ukraine the latest, and we're on what, day 600 and whatever, right? Every day I listen to that. I listen to more content than you can poke a hairy stick at, right? Just, there's a lot of stuff goes in my head. And so when I make, not all the time, sometimes I am maybe just off the cuff a little too much, but quite often when I make throwaway comments like Ukrainian drone operators, I think are better and there are more of them, that is based on stuff that's gone in here and is kicking around here, and then it comes out again. It's not just, I'm going to make that up because I think it sounds good. I'm going to make it up because I want it to be true. This is not the wishful thinking fallacy. Okay, so here is one of the sources of that justification.
One of the really fascinating parts of your report, Svetlana, was your visit to a sort of a drone training ground. You called it a drone fight club. Could you tell us about that? What did you see? What were they doing?
Yes, it was really amazing. I visited a drone school, and it was in disguise because these are currently the fields are military targets for Russia. So you just come to a gray building and you think, what is that? But you go inside and you see the rooms with the computers, and soldiers there are training to fly drones on simulators. And they were all so excited because it's so difficult for them to receive a permission to go from the front line to Kyiv or other cities, to leave their brigade, to have some time to learn, because their commanders, they tend not to let them go because people are needed in the front line. So they were so happy to be there. There were about 20 students, and they were training like in 20-minute sessions. And there are 3 weeks of learning. First week is in simulators at the school on computers. Second week it is somewhere in the big building inside, making different tricks and learning to fly already a real drone. And the third week is going to the actual field outside of Kyiv, and there they learn not just to fly a drone but also to drop the dummy bombs. And the training is very strict, and in the end of every week there is an exam, and if you fail the exam then they kick you out from the school. Because for us,
just listen to this. So, you know, I get annoyed like of being accused of presenting propaganda, and then someone then just presents propaganda as an accusation of me presenting propaganda. And I'm like, actually, yours isn't even propaganda. It's just a mere assertion. You could say the same as me because I didn't refer to this source in this case, but I am now. So, you know, come with a receipt. So we've got, this is just one drone school, and there are plenty of different ones. And we're going to go and look at that in a second. But this is one drone school, very strict. If you don't pass the exams, you fail, you're kicked off. So when I'm saying that Ukrainian drone operators are better than the Russians, is because I have no evidence that the Russians are doing this. There's no evidence at all. Now, I've seen a training, I have seen one bit of footage of a Russian training on a drone once, but it was nothing like that looked systematic or anything, you know, no huge organizational thing. I think I'm justified in believing that the Ukrainian approach to this is more organized and more systematic, and yet there's also a huge amount of variability because there's so many different training operators that are going on as well. But again, goes to show that there's just, as I say, I think there are more operators. United 24's army of drones trained 10,000 drone operators, and that was way back when. So, you know, it'll be more than that now.
The founder of this school told me that it is a great responsibility for them, because the soldier who doesn't know how to use the drone with the explosive very well, he can kill the whole unit with that bomb if he accidentally drops it too early or if something happens. So it was really fascinating to see that. And also I talked to the instructor, and he said that they try to provide at least 20 hours of flying per course for every soldier, so they are sure when they go to the battlefield they know how to fly the drone and how to drop the bombs, so they will be safe for the brigade and they will be effective.
Drawing all of your reporting together then, Svetlana, what do you think the next few months, half a year?
So she then goes on to talk a lot about procurement and whatnot. So we're going to pop into Svetlana Moronets's article for The Spectator inside Ukraine's drone army and just go to that training bit. I'm not going to talk about all these other points, but all these other points also feed into this sense that actually Ukraine is ahead of the game with drone manufacture, procurement, etc. And again, this was back from July. So this was 29th of July, and as a result of previous research and whatnot. So Krinichko, who is a drone manufacturer, offers 1 week training for those working with his drones, but learning how to use reconnaissance aircraft needs serious tuition. To this end, private drone schools have sprung up all over Ukraine. There is no state regulation for how this should be done, just official criteria: the ability to fly a drone a certain distance, perform a set task without losing control of it, and so on. So there's almost, in other words, there's a universal, or there's a nationally agreed set of criteria that you have to check off to fly drones, but the training for that can be delivered in many different ways, rather like private educational courses that can lead you towards a national certification in any kind of context, right? Anyway, to speed up the process, certification is overseen by the schools. Entrusting such crucial military work to new, untested schools is quite an experiment. One of the schools is Drone Fight Club, hidden in the Kiev suburb. This is one she was talking about. When I arrive, I see no signposting. If its whereabouts were ever to be discovered, it would be a prime target for Russian missiles. The school is run by Vladislav Plaksin, a professional pilot who now makes Lucky Strike and FPV drones and teaches soldiers how to use them. We enter a room with 7 computers where 20 students are training to fly drones using simulators. They learn in 20-minute sessions and spend 2 weeks practicing on computers. In week 3, soldiers are taken to fields outside Kyiv for target practice with real drones. There's a weekly exam, and anyone who fails it is removed from the school. Quote, I always say that before you give a graduation certificate, you need to trust the student enough that if your loved ones were next to him when he was going to fly a drone with a bomb, they would be safe, explains Plaksin. Operators attach the explosive and ready the drone for takeoff. Getting it wrong can have calamitous consequences. Quote, as a drone operator, you bear responsibility not only for yourself, but also for those soldiers working with you. They provide cover with machine guns, automatic rifles, and grenade launchers, ensuring your drone's safety. But they risk their lives for a purpose, because you bring results and you are worth it, he says. Drone Flight Club provides free training for soldiers, but refuses to grant certificates if commanders don't allocate enough days for them to complete the course. Quote, we know time is tight and that people are needed at the front, says Plaksin, but this drone could accidentally kill half a unit of soldiers. Even its battery can become explosive if it is not properly connected. The government pays about £170 to the schools for every graduated FPV drone operator. Some schools offer rapid 3-day training schemes, but 50 qualified specialists are better than 500 bad ones, he believes. The lack of regulation, while helpful in many ways, does increase the risk of cowboy drone schools offering shoddy training while still claiming money from the government. So there is this risk that you can get a bunch of poorly trained operators. However, there's no evidence provided of that, but in principle that could happen. I watch ETI, although they still have to supposedly have to have that minimum criteria to be allowed to go and operate those drones with their units. I watch ETI, a drone fight club instructor, train the students. He deliberately makes the job tricky at times to watch how the soldiers adapt. Turning off the camera on the drone or slightly adjusting a setting. Quote, there won't be greenhouse conditions at war, he said. We try to provide every student with at least 20 hours of real flying per course. So you do all that computer work first, and then there's 20 hours of actual real drone flying. He tells me how he was he has seen soldiers change over the past year or so. Quote, young conscripts come to drone school with their eyes burning, eager to learn. They romanticize it. When they return from the war, I don't see that flame anymore. It goes out. So far, 10,000 operators have come through Fedorov's Army of Drones program. He wants to double this number by Christmas. So we talked about 10,000 before. He wants to double that by Christmas. Christmas has been gone. So that would be 20,000 by now. Some will be redeployed to drone assault companies. Others may return to drone units within their brigades. Fedorov says the soldiers who train to fly drones are not guaranteed exemption from other duties. This is war, and they could be reassigned as sappers or drivers. Too many pilots would be a good problem to have. For now, Fedorov wants as many drones and people to operate them as is possible. Quote, there will always be a shortage of drones, he says. There will only be enough when we restore Ukraine's borders of 1991. So we have evidence to suggest that I am justified in my claims concerning drones. And there's more I could go through with you. I mean, there's another really great a video from Ukraine Latest or podcast, however you listen to it or watch it, is day 619 that details the procurement challenges and successes of the Ukrainian government and how they're going about getting a load of drones. And in fact, there's some interesting nuggets from that the Ukrainian drone operators prefer Ukrainian-made, indigenously made drones. They're cheaper. And therefore, if they go wrong, it doesn't matter as much, and it could well be easier to fix and stuff like that. So there's useful little nuggets. But we're pretty sure that Ukraine, I am pretty sure that Ukraine is creating these small FPV drones, producing them at a greater rate than Russia. I know what Russia has said, but as I said before, until I see the data to support that claim, I will disbelieve that claim, because Russia have lied in so many other ways that it seems eminently plausible to me that they are lying with their production stats of drones. But a good article there in The Spectator, so you can search it up, Inside Ukraine's Drone Army. That's by Svetlana Moronets. Anyway, that's all I'm going to really talk about today. It's just a bit of a response to those two comments. I think a good faith comment and not so good faith comment there. But thank you anyway, Relika Pereira, who has been watching my videos for a long time, it seems. Right, Darth Putin says, if you ever wondered what you would have done to stop Hitler, you're doing it now. So this is a parody account, but that's a really poignant statement that can kind of be read in a number of ways. And the main one is that if you've ever wondered what you would have done to stop Hitler, you're doing it now, which is not a lot. I mean, this is kind of a criticism against, I guess you could say, the impasse in Congress, or the inability of West to provide, I don't know, Taurus missiles or more distance missiles. What would you have done to stop Hitler? Yeah, about this, like prevaricated, and not a lot. And let's leave you on a positive, which when I first saw this, I thought, he's holding a Millennium Falcon, but he's not, evidently. This is so cute, says Tim White. A Ukrainian pilot constantly saw a girl wave to him when he flew his Mi-8 helicopter over her house near Kupiansk on the way to each mission. So this time he expressed his thanks for her support and surprised the girl with sweets dropped from his helicopter. Check this out. This is pretty cool.
Запакували цукерки, і для неї це було дуже приємно, і для нас теж саме. Ми вже повертались.
Which is pretty cool. I mean, there's one thing ordering something off Amazon. There's another thing getting it dropped from a helicopter unannounced. So that is pretty good stuff. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Just a quick one today because, I often talk for too long. Thank you. Take care. Speak soon. Please like, subscribe and share and all that kind of carry on. Toodle pips.